He sits alone in the sprawling garden of his London mansion, the evening sun casting long shadows across manicured lawns that stretch into emptiness. Simon Cowell, at 65th, thinner now, the sharp edges of his face softened by time, his trademark black T-shirt hanging loose on a frame diminished by surgeries and setbacks. The man who once commanded television's most formidable empire stares at his phone, scrolling through headlines of falling ratings and canceled shows, a digital eulogy to a crumbled kingdom. The empire that once blazed across continents now exists mostly in memory and YouTube clips. His son, Eric, now a teenager, calls from inside the house, but Simon doesn't immediately respond. How does one explain to a child that their father was once the most powerful man in entertainment, that millions trembled at his judgments, that his words could transform nobodies into somebodies with a single yes? But to understand how Simon Cowell reached this point, this quiet reckoning with fame's inevitable twilight, we must first return to the beginning, to the boy who would become television's most feared judge, and eventually its most cautionary tale. This is the story of a man who remade modern entertainment in his image, who built an empire on the fuel of humiliation and hope, and who ultimately discovered that the armor he constructed to survive the industry couldn't protect him from its cruelest lessons. Today, we uncover the true price Simon Cowell paid for his meteoric rise, the relationships fractured, the health deteriorated, the empathy sacrificed at fame's altar, and how his fall might contain more humanity than his ascent ever did. If this journey of ambition, isolation, and reluctant vulnerability moves you, tap like so others might find it too. October 7th, 1959. A crisp autumn day in Brighton, England, when Julie Brett, a ballet dancer, and Eric Selig Philip Cowell, a music industry executive, welcomed their second son into a comfortable but emotionally complicated world. Young Simon entered a home where expectations loomed as large as his father's presence in the EMI music empire. The family would soon relocate to Elstree, Hertfordshire, a move that provided material comfort but little emotional stability for a boy already displaying a heightened sensitivity to rejection. Simon's relationship with formal education proved fractious from the start. Restless, impatient, and chronically uninterested in subjects that wouldn't directly serve his ambitions, he drifted through Radlett Preparatory School with mediocre grades and a growing reputation for disruption. "School and I were mutually allergic to each other," he would later reflect. The classroom became his first taste of judgment, and of being found wanting. At Dover College, the pattern continued. While other students embraced academic pursuits, 16-year-old Simon had already turned his gaze toward the entertainment industry, harboring dreams stoked by his father's connections. But Eric Cowell Sr. was determined that his son would earn his place rather than inherit it. "My father never gave me a penny," Simon would later tell interviewers, a statement delivered with a complex mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. The defining wound of Simon's formative years came at age 17, when his father's health began to deteriorate. Eric Cowell Sr.'s heart condition cast a shadow over the family, creating an atmosphere where emotional expression took a back seat to British stoicism. Rather than addressing the fear of losing his father, young Simon constructed the first version of the armor he would wear throughout his career, a shell of indifference, of cutting humor, of keeping everyone at arm's length. Winter 1986. Simon sits in the cramped back office of a failing record company, head in his hands. At 27, he has just watched his first significant business venture, Fanfare Records, collapse into bankruptcy. The company's dissolution isn't just a professional setback, it's a personal humiliation. With debts mounting, Simon has no choice but to move back into his parents' home, sleeping in the same bedroom he had occupied as a teenager, the walls still adorned with posters of his childhood heroes. "I hit rock bottom," he would later recall. "I was in massive debt, I had failed publicly, and I had to start again with nothing." This failure burned something essential into Cowell's psychological makeup, the absolute terror of returning to this place of powerlessness. In the wake of Fanfare's collapse, Simon made a private vow that would ultimately shape his public persona. He would never again be vulnerable to others' judgment. Instead, he would become the ultimate judge. It was during this period of rebuilding that Simon began developing the persona that would eventually make him famous. The bluntness, the unflinching critiques, the refusal to sugarcoat, these weren't merely television affectations but psychological armor forged in the fire of his first significant failure. If he could be harder on others than they could possibly be on him, Perhaps he could keep that feeling of helplessness permanently at bay. By the early 1990s, Simon had clawed his way back, finding success at BMG with a series of novelty records and astute signings. But colleagues noted a change in the once affable music executive. Something harder had emerged, a willingness to be disliked, a comfort with conflict that would eventually translate into television gold. Yet beneath this emerging persona, the wounds of his early failures remained unhealed, driving him forward with a restlessness that would never quite subside. September 2002. A nondescript audition room in New York City. Simon Cowell sits behind a desk, flanked by Paula Abdul and Randy Jackson, as a nervous young woman named Kelly Clarkson steps forward to sing. American television is about to change forever, though few in the room realize it yet. American Idol had launched in the United States after Cowell's success with Pop Idol in the UK, but this was still uncharted territory, a high-stakes gamble on whether American audiences would embrace this brutally honest Brit. "You look like you're scared to death," Simon tells Clarkson with his trademark directness, but when she begins to sing, his expression shifts almost imperceptibly. Here is someone with genuine talent, the kind that justifies his entire approach. When Clarkson finishes, Simon offers what will become one of his rare moments of unqualified praise. "You're going to Hollywood." Months later, as Clarkson is crowned the first American Idol winner and her debut single, "A Moment Like This," breaks records, Simon Cowell ceases to be just another television personality. He becomes a phenomenon. The numbers tell only part of the story. 23 million viewers for the first season finale, a $1 million contract with FOX, spin-offs in more than 150 countries. Behind these figures lay a deeper truth. Simon had tapped into something fundamental about American culture at the dawn of the millennium, the voyeuristic thrill of watching dreams either soar or shatter in real time, and no one delivered the verdict with more compelling clarity than Simon Cowell. By 2004, Simon was earning a reported $8 million per season of American Idol, with his caustic sound bites becoming cultural currency. "You sound like a cat jumping off the Empire State Building," he told one hopeful. To another, "If you would be the last singer on Earth, it would be the end of the human race." These weren't just cruel barbs, they were calculated entertainment, each one cementing his status as television's most fearsome truth-teller. Yet success exacted its costs. Simon's schedule became punishing. Transatlantic flights twice weekly during overlapping seasons of American Idol and Britain's X Factor, sleeping just 4 hours per night, surviving on a diet of cigarettes and energy drinks. Close associates noted the physical toll, weight fluctuations, deepening circles beneath his eyes, moments of exhaustion so profound he would sometimes fall asleep during auditions. But more concerning was the psychological burden. "The problem with being Simon Cowell," he once admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability, "is that you have to be Simon Cowell 24 hours a day." The persona that had made him rich was slowly consuming the man behind it. Longtime friends reported that the line between the television character and the real Simon began to blur. Was he playing the villain, or had he become one? March 2006. A lavish party at London's Dorchester Hotel celebrates the renewal of X Factor for multiple seasons. At the height of the festivities, Simon slips away to a quiet balcony, lights a cigarette with slightly trembling hands, and makes a phone call to his mother, Julie. It's a small moment that speaks volumes. In his most triumphant professional hours, Simon still craves the validation of the woman, who knew him before the fame, before the character he's created took on a life of its own. The contradictions within Simon grew more pronounced as his empire expanded. The man who built a career on brutal honesty became increasingly guarded about his own life. The judge who claimed to value authenticity above all else now employed an army of publicists to manage his image. And the executive who professed to care only about talent found himself presiding over increasingly manufactured spectacles where ratings often trumped artistic merit. By 2010, Cowell had launched Got Talent franchises in 58 countries, with the X Factor expanding to territories as diverse as Albania, Kazakhstan, and Chile. His production company, Psycho Entertainment, had grown into a global juggernaut with stakes in music, television, and film. Forbes estimated his net worth at over $300 million. On paper, Simon Cowell had achieved everything he had ever wanted, but those closest to him began to notice concerning patterns: increasing isolation, difficulty maintaining intimate relationships, and a growing detachment from the very industry he had helped transform. "The bigger the empire grew, the lonelier he seemed to become," observed Sunita, his former girlfriend and longtime confidant. "Success was supposed to make everything better. Instead, it just complicated everything." Summer 2011. Simon sits in a Los Angeles doctor's office, receiving the first of many vitamin drip treatments that would become a part of his wellness regimen. The physician notes his elevated blood pressure, his chronic stress indicators, the signs of adrenal fatigue. "Your body is sending you messages," the doctor warns. "Eventually, you'll have no choice but to listen." Simon dismisses the concerns with a wave of his hand. There is too much at stake. The X Factor is launching in America, and the pressure to replicate his British success is immense. The American X Factor debut delivered solid ratings, 12.5 million viewers, but fell well short of American Idol's dominance. For the first time, Simon faced a narrative he couldn't control, that perhaps his touch wasn't quite as golden as everyone had believed. Behind the scenes, the strain began to show. Production staff reported volcanic mood swings, sleepless nights spent rewriting show formats, and an increasing reliance on medication to manage his stress and sleep difficulties. Yet even as professional challenges mounted, a more significant shift was occurring in Simon's personal life. In 2013, news broke that would permanently alter his carefully constructed world. Lauren Silverman, the wife of his friend Andrew Silverman, was pregnant with Simon's child. The tabloid frenzy was immediate and merciless. The man who had built a career judging others now found himself the subject of global judgment, his private choices dissected on the very entertainment news programs that had once celebrated his professional prowess. The birth of his son, Eric, in February 2014 marked a profound turning point. Friends reported that Simon, then 54, was suddenly confronted with questions of legacy beyond television ratings and chart positions. Named after his late father, baby Eric represented both a connection to Simon's past and a commitment to a future he had never previously envisioned for himself. "Having Eric gave me perspective I never had before," Simon would later admit. "Suddenly, I had something to lose that mattered more than any show or any deal." This newfound vulnerability, this crack in the armor, coincided with what industry analysts were beginning to call the decline of the Cowell era in television. August 6, 2020. Malibu, California. The grounds of Simon's sprawling coastal estate echo with an unexpected sound. Not television production crews or music industry executives, but the wail of an ambulance siren. Hours earlier, Simon had been testing a new electric bicycle when he fell, landing with such force that he broke his back in 3 places. The injury required a 6-hour surgery and the insertion of a metal rod to stabilize his spine. For a man who had built his identity on projecting strength and control, the accident represented a devastating loss of both. Unable to walk properly for months, dependent on others for basic care, Simon faced a reckoning that transcended his professional setbacks. "When you literally can't move, when you're in that much pain, everything else falls away," he would later tell The Sun in a rare, unguarded interview. "You realize how fragile everything is. Your body, your career, everything you've built." The physical trauma coincided with a professional nadir. By 2020, the ratings for his flagship shows had been in steady decline for years. The X Factor UK, once drawing 17 million viewers at its peak, had dwindled to just 7 million before its eventual cancellation. America's Got Talent, while still performing adequately, no longer dominated conversations the way it once had. A new generation of viewers had emerged, one less enthralled by the judgment-based format that had defined the Cowell era. The pandemic further accelerated the shift away from traditional television, with streaming platforms capturing the attention that reality competition shows had once commanded. As Simon lay recovering in his Malibu home, the entertainment landscape he had helped create continued evolving without him. The man, who had once seemed invincible, was now forced to confront not just his physical limitations, but a question that had likely haunted him since his early failures. What happens when the empire you've built begins to crumble around you? The years following Simon's back injury marked a period of profound reassessment. Physically, the recovery proved more challenging than he had anticipated. The man, once known for his relentless work ethic and punishing schedule, now struggled with chronic pain, mobility issues, and the psychological weight of physical limitation. Friends reported that Simon, who had always prided himself on appearing youthful and vital, became increasingly preoccupied with his mortality. The back surgery was followed by multiple cosmetic procedures, efforts, perhaps, to maintain control over at least one aspect of his increasingly uncontrollable reality. The face work was disturbing to those of us who'd known him for years, a longtime colleague confided to the Mirror in the 2022. It wasn't vanity so much as fear. You could see it in his eyes. He was watching everything he'd built start to slip away, and he was grasping at whatever he could still control. By 2023, the television landscape had shifted dramatically. The X Factor, once the crown jewel of Simon's empire, had been officially discontinued in both the UK and US markets after years of declining viewership. Britain's Got Talent and America's Got Talent continued, but increasingly felt like relics of a bygone entertainment era. Younger audiences gravitated toward content creators on platforms like TikTok and YouTube, where the barriers to entry were non-existent, and the judgment came not from authoritative panels but from algorithm-driven public engagement. The financial implications were substantial. While still enormously wealthy by any standard, Simon watched as his annual income decreased significantly. Psycho Music, once home to global superstars like One Direction and Little Mix, had been absorbed back into Sony following a 2020 buyout. The production company that had once employed hundreds now operated as a skeletal operation, primarily managing existing intellectual property rather than creating new content. Perhaps most painful was the shift in cultural relevance. The new generation of entertainment executives and creators viewed Simon's approach as outdated, even problematic. His unapologetically harsh critiques, once celebrated for their authenticity, were increasingly characterized as relics of a less empathetic era. Where Simon had once defined the conversation around talent and entertainment, he now found himself struggling to remain part of it. September 2023. Simon sits in a London restaurant with a small group of longtime associates discussing potential new ventures. The conversation is animated, with Simon pitching ideas with characteristic intensity. But when the discussion turns to streaming platforms and digital engagement metrics, a subtle shift occurs. Simon grows quieter, his contributions more tentative. It was like watching someone try to speak a language they'd learned too late in life, one attendee later recalled. He understood the words, but not the music of it. The personal toll of this professional decline manifested in increasingly concerning ways. Simon's weight fluctuated dramatically, with periods of extreme weight loss followed by visible swelling potentially related to medications. His once famous work ethic gave way to reports of missed meetings and last-minute cancellations. Most troubling, to those in his inner circle, was his growing isolation. The man who had once commanded rooms full of industry power players now spent increasing amounts of time alone in his various properties, connected to the world primarily through the screens that had once showcased his influence. For Eric, now approaching his teenage years, the contrast between his father's historical importance and current reality created its own complications. How does a child reconcile the global icon they see in archived footage with the increasingly withdrawn figure at the breakfast table? Friends observed that Simon's relationship with his son represented both his greatest joy and his most acute anxiety, the fear that Eric would witness not his father's legendary rise, but his gradual fade into irrelevance. The cruelest thing about Simon's trajectory, noted a former American Idol producer, is that the man who built his brand on unflinching truth now struggles to confront the most difficult truth of all, that everything, even the most spectacular success, has its season. If Simon Cowell's rise embodied a certain late 20th century dream of meritocratic success, the belief that talent and determination could overcome all obstacles, his late-period existence offers a more nuanced meditation on what remains when that dream fades. At 65, Simon has entered what associates describe as a period of reluctant introspection, a reckoning with the true cost of the empire he built and the person he became in order to build it. This reckoning begins, perhaps inevitably, with health. Following his back injury and subsequent surgeries, Simon committed to a more balanced lifestyle, reducing his legendary 20-cigarette-a-day habit, adopting a predominantly plant-based diet, and embracing regular physical therapy. Yet the physical challenges persist. Recent public appearances reveal a man moving more carefully, managing pain that friends describe as constant and humbling. The body that once worked tirelessly in service of ambition now demands accommodation, a daily reminder of limitations that no wealth can eliminate. The physical stuff forces you to slow down, Simon told The Guardian in a rare 2024 interview. And when you slow down, you start seeing things you missed when you were running at full speed. Some of it's not comfortable to look at. This new perspective has prompted a reevaluation of relationships. Once notorious for maintaining connections with ex-girlfriends while struggling to form lasting romantic bonds, Simon has settled into domestic partnership with Lauren Silverman, though the couple has not married. Their relationship, tested by intense public scrutiny from its controversial beginnings, has evolved into what friends describe as Simon's first truly equal partnership, one where his famous control impulses have necessarily yielded to compromise. More significant is Simon's evolving relationship with his son. As Eric enters adolescence, father and son have developed what associates characterize as a surprisingly tender connection. The man once feared for his cutting critiques now shows remarkable patience as a parent, determined that Eric will not inherit the emotional armor that both protected and isolated his father. Recent paparazzi photos capture moments of unguarded affection between them. Simon's arm draped protectively around his son's shoulders, genuine laughter shared over private jokes, the subtle ways in which Eric's presence seems to soften the famous Cowell edge. Professionally, Simon exists now in a kind of twilight. While no longer the dominant force he once was, he maintains connections to the entertainment industry primarily through his existing properties and occasional appearances. Industry insiders note that while new Cowell-developed formats no longer automatically trigger bidding wars, his advice is still sought on existing franchises, a nod to his historical importance if not his current influence. Perhaps the most meaningful shift has occurred in Simon's approach to his legacy. The man who once seemed concerned only with ratings, record sales, and his position on wealth lists has begun engaging with philanthropic causes with unprecedented seriousness. His work with children's hospices in the UK has evolved from celebrity appearances to substantial financial support and personal involvement. Similarly, his advocacy for animal welfare organizations has intensified, with significant donations and public campaigns against animal cruelty. There's something poignant about watching Simon interact with the children at the hospice, observes a staff member at London's Haven House Children's Hospice, where Cowell has become a regular visitor. You can see him struggling with the natural instinct to maintain emotional distance, but these kids break through that. They don't care about his fame or his fortune. They just respond to his presence, his attention, and you can see it matters to him in a way that's different from entertainment industry validation. This late-period Simon offers 3 insights worth extracting. First, that empires built on judgment eventually find themselves judged by the very standards they established. Second, that the armor we construct to protect ourselves from life's wounds often prevents the connections that might actually heal them. And third, that reinvention remains possible even after the spotlight has begun to dim, perhaps especially then, when the pressure of public performance has eased enough to allow for genuine reflection. Summer 2024. A small gathering at Simon's London home celebrates Eric's birthday. Among the guests are several contestants from early seasons of Simon's shows, individuals whose careers he launched, whose lives he changed with a single yes. The conversation turns to the evolution of the entertainment industry, to how different the landscape looks from when they all first met. Simon listens more than he speaks, a noticeable change from his once dominant conversational style. When he does offer observations, guests note a quality rarely associated with the Simon Cowell of popular imagination: humility. The industry moved on, he acknowledges with a small shrug. Maybe it needed to. Maybe I needed it to. In this simple statement lies the essence of Simon's late-period wisdom, the recognition that permanence is an illusion, that relevance is always temporary, and that perhaps the most meaningful legacy isn't found in ratings or record sales, but in the capacity for growth even after the applause has faded. The garden at Simon's London home grows quiet as evening deepens into night. The phone that once buzzed constantly with industry calls now rests silent beside him. His son has gone inside, leaving Simon alone with the weight of his memories and the uncertainty of what comes next. The empire has indeed diminished. The ratings fallen, the cultural footprint reduced, the invitations less frequent. Yet in this diminishment, something unexpected has emerged. A man more complex and perhaps more authentic than the character he portrayed for decades. The true tragedy of Simon Cowell at 65 isn't found in canceled shows or declining influence, but in the realization that the qualities that might have brought him genuine fulfillment Vulnerability, empathy, connection were precisely those sacrificed in pursuit of an empire that could never last. Yet in this tragedy lies a strange redemption, the possibility that in losing the kingdom, he might finally discover the man. If Simon's journey has moved you, consider sharing this video so others might find it. And I'm curious, which aspect of his story resonates most with you? The meteoric rise, the painful fall, or this quieter third act where the man behind the persona finally begins to emerge? Leave your thoughts below. After all, the most compelling judging panel may be the one we face within ourselves when the cameras have long since stopped rolling.